Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to go off of my prepared materials and just see if I might ask a question to the great panelists we have here today who have worked so hard on these reckonings with symbols from the Confederacy. Um, Far away from the military base named Fort Bragg, on the other side of the country, I represent a bucolic little community on the California coast named Fort Bragg. And it's a little interesting quirk of history for those who would look at it as some sort of a historic significance. It was named before the Civil War. But there's no connection between Braxton Bragg and this community. He never set foot there, never went anywhere close to it. It inherited this name just on a historic lark, and it has continued for generations. Well, fast forward to 2020. We're having an interesting conversation in the community of Fort Bragg, which is a wonderful, kind, and non-racist community that is grappling with the fact that they've got a really bad name that doesn't represent at all who they are or who they've ever been. But a lot of folks have nostalgia and memories and other things attached to that name. And so I'd like to ask any of our panelists who want to speak to this what they would say to this community I represent that is struggling in its own way in this moment that our country is in to figure out what to do about this particular anachronistic symbol that, like it or not, exalts a Confederate hero, Braxton Bragg. Yeah, Reverend Lee.
We've spoke a lot about Congressman John Lewis, and I actually had the opportunity to preach to him at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, the historic church that Martin Luther King was pastor of. And as I was going up, he actually was dancing to On Time God, which is a song by Dottie Peebles, where she says he's an on-time God. And I believe by divine providence, we have been given an opportunity to respond to the fact that nostalgia does not equal our ability to want to change things. We should want to change things and not be complicit through our nostalgia. That is the most dangerous thing we can do. It's always been that way. You know, I'm a pastor. I have to deal with that in the church. People say, well, gosh, it's always been that way. We can't change it. That for me is a non-starter. That's a no-go. We have to have this conversation now.
Mayor Landrieu, do you have any thoughts you might be willing to share if you're still with us?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. I would just not to pretend to be a reverend, but I'm always mindful of God's grace. Always gives us a chance for renewal and to think about who we are and what we are. Clearly, from a process point of view, that is a local decision that should be made by that community, not by the federal government, certainly not by Congress. I agree with Reverend Lee, though, that holding on to nostalgia for nostalgia purposes is useless. I think communities really should think about who they are and what values they are. And there is consequence to living under the shadow of someone that fought to destroy the country for the sake of preserving slavery, even though it may be historically weird that some community so far away from the South was named after a Confederate general. It's a decision that the community has to make. But if I were a member of the community, having learned what I have learned and knowing what I know now, I would prefer to change the name.
Appreciate that. Anyone else care to comment?
Yes, this is Frank Smith with the African American Civil War in Washington, D.C. I think this is an opportunity for the community to talk about this and to rethink itself and to come up with a name that might more appropriately fit the values that community holds today. And I think that makes this an important discussion. I do think I saw something from Dr. David Blight in the Washington Post a few weeks ago saying that you need to build some more monuments. I'm on that side. We have a monument to President Abraham Lincoln signing the Emancipation Proclamation. He said we should put them up all over the country. I agree with that. So somebody needs to pay some attention to trying to get some things up on the landscape that represent the most important period in the history of this country, which is the Civil War, which changed this country from a country that supported slavery, built on slavery, to a country where you could talk about freedom. It's an important document, it's an important time in our history. But we have to find a way to talk about it that brings us all together, because this is a great nation that came out of it, and we ought to be able to talk about it in a way that makes sense.
Those are great thoughts. I'm out of time, but Madam Chair, thanks so much for indulging that additional question, and thanks to the panelists again.